joining us and taking notes.
Yeah.
So today we are going to talk about the Tsuchiya paper, and seems like we only have one paper to discuss. Either we can make the slot a bit shorter, or we can discuss more. Depends on you. Yeah. Yeah. So maybe everyone can say a bit about how do you feel about this paper. For example, why you choose this paper.
Sure, I can start maybe since I'm
Would be
presenting
nice.
our paper. So I really embraced what Now said about choosing a paper that you don't really know anything about. So I picked it because I was intrigued by the title. And I really don't know anything about category theory or IIT. So I was interested in reading the paper, and at first I was a bit unsure how it would go, but I'm looking forward to discussing it because I think as someone without much background, it's written in a way that you can still grasp, I think, the main concepts.
What about Matteo and Sandra?
So
Just say
when
something in general. How do you like the paper, or why you choose this paper, or your background? For example,
so,
yeah.
in theory, I should know a little bit at least of category theory. So in some sense of like, okay, I don't need to know much, but at least half of it, if I have an idea of what it means, could be good. So I feel like, yeah, as an attendee especially, I feel like maybe I can actually have an idea of vaguely one of the two things is, and I mean, the whole point for me in being in this summer school is exactly to see how category theory can be used to describe concepts that are outside of mathematics, from my perspective, at least, though IIT, apparently it is actually a mathematical construct. So I was curious to see how this was built up. So that's why one way or the other, I did want to join one of these meetings. The paper is, I mean, it's nice. This is not the one where they get too much into details. And I think it's also good for me because, again, the IIT seems actually complex and seems to use mathematics in different ways from what I'm used to anyway. So I think it would take a lot more time for me to understand the details, but at least to get an idea and overview of the approach, that was actually interesting.
That's really nice. Yeah.
Yeah, so for me, I was a little bit intimidated by the paper when I saw the mathematics factors in it. But actually, when I think of it in a broader term and not really focus on mathematics or this kind of things, it seems very reasonable and also very structured, which I think is very important in consciousness studies, especially when we talk about phenomenological consciousness. So yeah, that's why I think it's quite revolutionary, I might say, of course, because we didn't have had like very structure and very like methods to assess qualia and other things. But yeah, I think I have to dig deeper into this to fully understand it. So yeah.
Yeah. Good. Then maybe we just start, by the presentation.
Great, sounds good. I'll share some slides.
Great.
Is that looking okay?
Yes, I can see it.
Great. So as has already been described, we're discussing this paper by Tsuchiya, Taguchi, and Saigo that uses category theory to assess the relationship between consciousness and integrated information theory. So I didn't say much about my background, so maybe I'll do that now. This is the lens through which I was kind of reading the paper. I'm a developmental psychologist, and really, I don't really do so much work in consciousness. But our lab is sort of becoming increasingly interested in self-consciousness and how infants kind of develop and construct the sense of self. So I don't have so much background in the scientific study of consciousness and the different theories that are out there. I've, of course, like heard of them, but I don't know much about IIT and how it differs from, other neuroscientific theories of consciousness. But I have an interest in phenomenology from the philosophical side. So that's why I was interested in this summer school. And it was really interesting to see how, as Sandra said too, how this paper, but IIT, how it's trying to give structure to our conscious experience and the subjective nature of our conscious experience. So the paper begins by kind of describing the main challenge in the scientific study of consciousness. Of course, the subjective nature is very difficult to define or measure, but there are increasingly number of theories that try to tackle this hard problem or the subjective nature of consciousness, one of which is integrated information theory. So IIT offers a quantitative framework for consciousness and proposes that there is a precise mathematical formalism that is actually identical to consciousness or qualia. However, the lack of a clear link between these two domains, consciousness and IIT, or the MICS, makes it really difficult to assess the validity of this identity or identical claim. So what this paper proposes is to use category theory as a way to make this link and to assess the relationship between qualia or consciousness and the mathematical formalism in IIT. Whoops, sorry. So very generally, category theory considers everything to be either an object or an arrow that connects objects. So in the figure here, you have two categories, category geometry and category algebra. And here they're linked. The relationship between these categories has been proven to be mathematically analogous, meaning there's a functor that exists between them. So a functor is a structure preserving map between categories. And in category theory, a functor provides a mathematical framework for translating a relationship in one domain to a distinct and separate domain. So it also provides a formal way to assess the degree to which two separate categories or domains are similar and how they're similar. So similar in what particular way. So you can see in the figure on the right side, there are different levels of similarities that you can assign to between categories. So on the weaker end, it could be the existence of a functor. On the strong end, two categories could be identical. So in using category theory, it may allow us to evaluate how IIT's mathematical structure and conscious experience are similar. So is it indeed identical, as proponents of IIT argue, or might it be a weaker form of similarity, like existence of a functor? So as mentioned before, category theory provides a framework for analyzing the relationships between structures, which can then be applied, as the authors propose, to map the subjective structures of consciousness to the objective structures of MICS, which is proposed in IIT. So when we begin to think about how we might link these categories, we can talk about them very briefly and broadly. So on the subjective nature of consciousness side, we of course have qualia. So people describe qualia as the contents of consciousness or phenomenal consciousness. We can also describe qualia in a broad sense, which means a single moment of whole experience, or in a more narrow sense. So this is a specific aspect of one moment of experience. So seeing red or experiencing red, for example. So as I was reading this, of course, I was thinking, how do we formalize this? And I think in some of the intros, a lot of people are interested in this as well. How do we formalize the structure of qualia? On the IIT side, the structure comprises of a maximally irreducible conceptual structure, or MICS, and this is derived from these 5 phenomenological axioms and the corresponding postulates. Now, to be honest, I really didn't understand so much of this when I was reading this section. I didn't invest that much time in trying to understand it either, but I'm really interested in learning more about IIT in the summer school and through participating in these journal clubs. So according to IIT, there's a mapping between a certain MICS, which is derived from connectivity and a state of certain subsets of neurons in the brain, and the particular quality that the subject of the brain is experiencing. So inherent in IIT is already this mapping between conscious experience, the structures of conscious experience, and this mathematical formalism. So then it makes sense, according to the paper, to apply category theory in actually making this link or formalizing this mapping between these two structures. Now, in order to do that, we have to think about MICS as a category and also qualia as a category. So in the paper, they discuss, whether this is reasonable, are there grounds to think about these two domains as categories? So when it comes to MICS, it seems like, and as written in the paper already, it makes sense to think about objects and arrows in MICS because it involves a complex web of interactions between sub-mechanisms in a system as it relates to the whole system. When you think about the arrows or the relations between the different objects in MICS, these are already defined in a way that includes concepts from category theory. Now, on the qualia side, thinking about qualia as a category seems to be less straightforward. However, they do say that you can think about in certain qualia, it's very easy to think about what the objects might be, but perhaps there are other qualia where it's less straightforward. So what they talk about when there are abstract relations between things, what is the object here? And they say, well, maybe you could think about relations between objects as arrows. There are also many complicated objects in our experience, for example, in the perception of a face. And here they say, well, you can think about that as an object with many arrows. They also describe or say that the category theoretic approach to structuring qualia is actually very similar to phenomenological approaches to consciousness. So this Husserlian tradition of understanding the structure of conscious experience. Okay, so if we're convinced that the MICS and qualia are both categories, then the remaining job is to mathematically prove that there exists a functor between these two categories. So any mapping F or functor that preserves similarity relations denoted by the arrows among the objects within the category would qualify as a functor. The paper then wraps up by saying that if we are able to find a functor, that there exists a functor that preserves the structures of both qualia and the MICS, this would allow one to analyze the mathematical structures of systems whose qualia are unknown, for example, infants or non-human animals or potentially AI. And the paper wraps up by saying that category theory is actually very broad. So you could apply this approach to any mathematical framework. And here I put perhaps also any analysis of qualia. So I just have a couple of questions that came up as I was reading the paper, which I'd be happy to hear your thoughts about. And these are also things I would like to learn more about as well. First, what are the methods that are used to determine the MICS and the structure of qualia? The paper describes a couple of studies towards the end where this has been done. But I think I would like to go into more detail and maybe read a couple more empirical papers about how exactly you figure out the MICS from these neural recordings. And then I'm not sure if this question makes sense, but it seemed like on the IIT side, there is already this structure that exists between objects and relations between these objects. And category theory is trying to find a functor that maps this onto some structure in qualia. So something that came up, and I don't know if this is the right way to see it, but how can we be sure that we're not imposing a structure on our conscious experience such that it does map onto this mathematical formalism? I don't know if that makes sense, and if that's really a concern or worry. I was also wondering whether category theory could reveal the absence of a functor or prove this. So in the paper, and I'm really not familiar with category theory, so I don't know if this makes sense either, but it seems like we can try to find the existence of a functor, but is there a way to know that there cannot be a functor between these two categories, versus we just haven't found the functor yet? Or yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. And then the paper, as I mentioned, wraps up by saying, if we find the existence of a functor, then we can start to understand the qualia of other beings or states for which we don't understand the qualia. But to what extent can we use one MICS qualia functor to infer the qualia of other states? I don't quite understand how this would be or how this would happen. And this comes from perhaps my biases in studying infants. Some of us at least have this idea that, infants, the structure of their cognition, let's say I'm a psychologist as well, to me is so different. Pre-linguistically, they don't have the same conceptual structures as we do. So it's always tricky to try and figure out or know, what their experience is like. Whether you show them something, we don't really know how they process what we see. So how do we take this mathematical structure and infer a qualia that might be radically different from our qualia?
Yeah, because we don't have the access. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, we don't have the access. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So someone has some idea to relate to these questions, or the previous question about the formalization of those structure, like the categories? Please. You actually all can let the microphone open and you can just talk.
No, so at least to address the easiest of the questions, at least I can do that. About the existence or non-existence of functors. I mean, in that sense, category theory is so vague that vague or flexible, depends on the perspective you want to have, and that unless the second category has no objects, strictly speaking, it's possible, but there's only one like this, of course. There are always functors.
Okay.
Because you can all, but at the point there are stupid ones. I mean, the one you just map everything to one object, every morphism to the identity, and of course it works. It has zero relevance. I mean, okay, it's important it exists, but of course, meaning-wise, I mean, again, I cannot say zero relevance because it's not true. In the end, these things are actually it matters that they exist, but they don't carry a meaning as we intend it to be. So yeah, in that sense, it's a bit. Also because I mean, I know in that sense the sorry if I can go on. I mean, the paper, of course, points out that even the existence of a functor will be interesting, but of course, you want a meaningful functor. So, I mean, if you have both in two directions, like you have an equivalence category, a junction, or whatever, that would be amazing. There will be a lot of information there because you go both ways, of course. If you only in one direction, okay, that depends what type of functor it is. A lot. So I think in that sense, they're being a bit optimistic in this respect. Right? And optimistic meaning I have a functor and it's one who actually tells me something interesting. Yeah. So just to answer that question that, of course, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, so may I have a small point? Are you trying to say that the similarity measurement in the first slides, maybe you can show the slides again. If we only have the existence of the functor, then would be too weak because the meaning will be lost because of this, even we have such a functor. But if we have the second level, for example, if we have the adjunctor, adjunction, then would be better because adjunction gives us a both sides possibility to transform the information. Then according to this picture, it's a second line, right? Then maybe we do have some meaning preserved, but not only some structure, right? That is what you want to say.
Yes. So in that sense, the picture there is really, how do you say, for astronomy, like it's not in scale. I mean, the difference between existence of functor and existence of adjunction, it's
huge,
enormous.
Okay.
I mean, in adjunction carries a lot of information. Because not only you have two functors, but the two functor has a very precise and objectively, also to me, never easy to explain, connection. So there is a lot of information in if you can give an adjunction. Adjunctions are everywhere, objective mathematics. You keep all the important and interesting fact. Usually it comes from some hidden adjunction somewhere. But that means when you find one, you really have a lot of information. So, I mean, if you only have a functor, well, it depends on the functor, I would say. In that sense. If you have an adjunction, guarantee you have a lot of stuff. If you only have a functor, okay, I need to look at the functor. But of course, it means you kind of have something interesting to say, probably. But yeah, that depends. I don't know if I answer, but basically what you said is correct.
Yeah, I think you give a very nice point. Yeah. Someone else want to say something? Sandra?
I wanted to ask if I understand that correctly. So it's pretty much that we will always have a functor if the categories are at least somewhat similar, right? That's is it correct?
Again, so strictly speaking, as long as none of the two is empty, meaning as long as you have at least one object in one of the two, there is always a functor. But again, the one who collapses everything to somewhere there.
Okay, so
thank you very much. I mean, it's not particularly meaningful. So in that sense, the idea, I think. Oh, sorry, you want to say something else?
No, so I just wanted to ask. So we have to focus on assessing like a strength of a functor to.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, at this stage, I think the idea, basically, at least from my perspective, it says, okay, so we have this weird mathematician has this weird language called category theory, and it proved to be very flexible in mathematics to be one language to talk about many things, and that means comparing things. Then why not? Let's not use the same thing in here. Let's see if we can rephrase IIT in categorical language. Let's try to phrase qualias and consciousness in category theory language. And then once both of them have the same language, then I can see if I can compare them. And the word compare translates into which functors can I find between them, in the hope that I can actually find functors who do transfer information from one category to the other one and gives me something. In mathematics, it worked very well in many areas. So why not being optimistic and hope this works here too? This is my take on the paper, basically on the grand scheme. But then it really, so functor just means like, okay, I have a way to go from here to here. Does this tell me something? Then I need to see the functor. Probably yes, but I mean.
So yeah, maybe Matteo, one point, the thing maybe you want to also emphasize is the comparability or comparability given by category theory is essential here, but only with a functor is too weak.
I mean, the existence of a functor per se doesn't tell me much. Because again, there are the trivial ones. But I mean, to me, this is really kind of minor remark in that sense. The understanding is like, okay, I want to find a decent one, but I mean, my assumption there is some structure is transported, so I can just see what happens.
Does it give you a response, Sandra?
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
So related to the other questions, maybe we just talked about the methods, right? Using the category method, even if we give the, even if we use the category method to show there is a functor, then the method itself does not guarantee that we know more about the consciousness or the qualia using the MICS, right? We can more or less put it this way. So do you want to make the point less trivial? Say we do have a meaningful functor here, and how would you like to formalize those two things? Because if we only consider the broad sense qualia and narrow sense qualia, it might be easier to directly think about the narrow sense qualia, how they relate to each other. But when we talk about the broader sense qualia, it seems like there's already a problem in building the category of qualia or the category of conscious experience, if someone want to say something.
I think maybe that how I understand what you're saying is that in the broad quality in the broad sense, there's always this subjective dimension. Then I feel like if I can try to use categoric theory language, I mean, the objects in our conscious experience are going to be so individual. And I mean, as a developmental psychologist, I often think about how these come about. It's so unique to our own history. I have difficulty understanding how you can find a structure of qualia in the broad sense that is generalizable. But maybe it's because I don't understand objects and relations in this way yet.
I think here maybe one point we have to make a bit clear, that is the category theory gives a comparison between the structure. So even we are really saying, how to say, formalize the qualia in broader or narrow sense, we're also only focused on the relationship between them. Say, if we say, oh, okay, here's a causal relationship in the sense of making difference, that is the center of IIT, then what they care is really mapping one qualia to another one, which gives you different feeling, we can put it this way. That's good enough. So then if we do such kind of things, say you see red, I see green, we can tell the difference, then there's already some error between red and green to mapping them to each other. And then building such a relationship or relational property with amongst all these qualia, then we more or less have a structure of them. Yeah. So maybe this kind of structure can be some substrate that people share, like different agents share those kind of structure, but not really the content of the qualia. That is my understanding. Yeah.
That's really helpful. So it's more about the structure rather than the contents, and then related to that last point, then yeah, so it's not so much about what the experience is of, you know, a worm, if we are able to map this, but rather what is the structure of their qualia.
Yeah. But then the related question would be, well, is that enough that we only focus on the structure, right?
Right.
In that sense, I guess there's this this is what I heard again. But I mean, then I'm a non-expert on the other side, so I don't know. But there's I saw the way I got to know this branch of research is through this idea of using these things called unida lemma. I don't know if you heard it here and there. Someone's talking about this in other papers. But I guess the concept, because this is the central idea in category theory, actually, that you have no idea what objects are, and somehow you don't care. But so the idea is that you only care about is the relation, because so this is not just a philosophy, it's actually a theorem from the category perspective. The structure determines the object, meaning you can ignore what the object is, because in the end the object is more or less univocally determined by the relation or the non-relation between this object and everything else. So to push it, one could say, well, I don't know what the qualia is, or I don't know what consciousness is. But if I can fully describe how it relates to everything else, basically I know what it is. So I mean, it could be like a bit of a chicken way of treating things from some perspective. Like, well, I don't know what it is, but I can tell you how you work with it in some sense. But it is an approach. I mean, if some sense in category theory, it's there. I mean, if you look at the definition itself, the only thing you have is arrows. So what else do you talk about other than arrows? But yeah, and in my mind, sorry, but I mean, yeah, I have to say again, mathematically speaking, at least the way I've seen some definitions in mathematics, is like for sometimes, I don't know if this is the idea of whoever had this perspective, but sometimes you actually don't know how to define an object because you have a vague idea. So somehow you you make up a definition that more or less fits your intuition, and then you forget the intuition, you just keep the definition itself. So one could even say, I don't think this is the approach, but one could even say, well, I don't know what conscience is, but IIT works more or less as I expect conscience to be. So from now on, by definition, conscience is IIT. Of course, I mean, again, this is kind of a cheating way of acting it. But as long as the behavior of this theory fits what I would expect, then from now on, this is exactly what I expect it to be. Based on the idea that intuition sometimes is actually usually is full of fallacies anyway. So I just need to ground my intuition on something. Again, I don't think this is the base idea. Maybe this is the idea. IIT is identical to these qualia structures. Sorry if I'm very sloppy when I talk about these things, because that is really not my expertise. One attitude would be like, well, again, these I know, these I don't know. So from now on, I go the same. But in that sense, I'm imposing. There was the other question: am I imposing a structure? Well, technically yes, but because what else do I do? I mean, as long as though I feel inside that I'm imposing the right structure, and then that means needs agreement between people. But in mathematics, this is actually not uncommon as an approach, let's say. Sorry if I talk too long.
No, it was really helpful. Because I did get the sense that, yeah, indeed, you are imposing a structure such that it fits with IIT, and perhaps from a category theory perspective, that's not a problem. It makes sense to do so in order to find the functor or find a functor or characterize a similarity. But it seems like the paper begins by saying, we should first, they're independent. There's IIT that proposes the structure. And then when we think about the structure of qualia, it looks like this. And then what is the function? Is there a functor or what is the functor that exists? But maybe they're not so independent at the outset. I'm not sure.
Yeah, also, I mean, as an intermediate step, one could say, okay, maybe this is not exactly what we feel like consciousness, but it's still something. So I can still get some, I mean, I'm losing something with this formalization, but I do get something out of it anyway. So at least as a first step, then maybe we can have a better model who generalizes this one and then includes other aspects that at the moment I'm neglecting. But again, I'm just I'm transporting what I've seen happening in mathematics. So different theories are usually built on each other, and each of them capture more and more of a different aspects. But yeah, usually you go by improving models somehow. But again, I don't know if it really applies in that sense. That's what I want to learn.
I think Matteo, sorry. I think Matteo make a very good point that mathematicians gives a one approach to what is consciousness. And here in this paper, actually, Tsuchiya also mentioned that he wants to give the both direction, right? The principled test of whether there is a functor and the empirical test and then they gives a lot of like examples. How can we do such experiment to check whether there is a functor whether the MICS works well, kind of like these things. So I think Matteo make the good point from the mathematician, and maybe Emanuela, I don't know whether I read it right,
No,
gives
that's
from
great.
the other side, say, okay, from a psychologist's perspective, how I consider this structure, how can I represent that in an experiment? How can I design an experiment with infants? How can I tell whether this infant feels something different in this moment than maybe in comparison to another moment? Kind of like those things.
Hmm.
So yeah, just add some information. Yeah, because of course these papers, although very related to category theory, it's a main point, but it still concerns the empirical parts, not only saying, okay, as long as we have a functor from the mass to the consciousness or the consciousness they are steady, that's good enough. No, Tsuchiya also consider the other direction. Yeah. So, Sandra, do you have something to say about, for example, whether the using category theory to study consciousness study, I mean mathematical study of consciousness, will impose some extra structure that align with maybe IIT or other mathematical study of consciousness?
Yeah, I do think so. I mean, I'm not an expert. I'm also kind of new in this field regarding like phenomenological consciousness. But what I feel like is that the structure of qualia, the relationships between qualia, and also the mix in IIT are pretty much very similar, right? They are pretty much the same. So I feel like there's a reason why we want to like compare them. I'm still not really sure how assessing like a functor works, but I get it. It's like more mathematics work, right? But I also like have a question regarding the figure 3, because I'm not really sure if I understand that correctly. So if I can say, we have like a stimuli, right? So we present the stimuli to the participant, and we get the specific neurons like are firing. So we get the different mix from one brain and the another brain, right? And then we have the qualia, and the qualia are different. So I just wanted to ask, is it that if we have the mix from the brain, from the first one and the second one, and if we see that these are different, it means that the participant saw different qualia? Is it what I said, or I misunderstood that?
Can you reformulate it again?
Yeah, sure. So if we have the first brain and the second brain,
yeah,
and we got the mix right from based on the IIT, based on the neurons firing, and we see that they are different. So does it mean that the participants like get different qualia because these mix are different?
So you say, can we reconstruct the experience from the mathematical structure? Say, if the MICS gives you a different structure, then you could imagine that the agent could experience something different too. Is that your
Yes,
point?
if we compare these two, we can say that these two participants had basically different qualia.
I think at least according to here, that is what IIT want to say. Yeah.
Okay.
Of course, that is related to a question. also relate to what Matteo just said. If we have such a junction between the category of qualia and category of mathematical formalism, can we reconstruct it? Say, if we only have the junction, seems like we might not able to reconstruct it because maybe you have a mismatch, right?
Right.
You might need something more similar, like some equivalence relationship or something more. Then you could maybe say, okay, I can reconstruct the experience from the mathematical formalism. Even we cannot really have the subjective perspective or access to different agents' qualia per se.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Tsuchiya also mentioned that somewhere in the paper. Say he also say maybe only the existence of the functor would be too weak. Maybe we need something stronger. Yeah.
Mhm. Right.
We also have a point we didn't mention. Yeah. In the presentation, there's two questions about. One is, can category theory reveal or prove absence of a functor? And the other is, to what extent can we use one MICS so that qualia functor to infer qualia of other states? Yeah, that is the point Sandra just mentioned. Yes.
Yeah.
The previous question we might have not yet touched. Anyone have some idea? Would you want to say show the slides of this? Yeah.
I think Matteo mentioned that in a very broad sense, there will always be a functor between two categories.
Yeah, that is maybe you can say more. Yoneta Lema, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess it's more also what he said, whether this is meaningful or not. I was thinking more, I don't know if it's right to say, but there's, from the phenomenological perspective, there's always this question of, can you reduce conscious experience to neural states, right? Can you reduce it to this? And I was thinking, asking this question more in that sense, with that in mind. Like, if there was no functor, could we then say that consciousness qualia is something more than these structures, neural structures?
Yeah, it is more or less related to the emergence problems, right?
Oh, okay. Again, this I know nothing about. I mean, I just started to talk to think about how the discussion about consciousness and also neuroscience objectively. So I'm a baby in that context. But no, I mean, I can imagine. Yeah, this would really require, though, I would say, functors in two directions. So, like proving that one exists and the other one doesn't, or there are structures in one category that you cannot find in the other one. So then, in this case, you would actually prove, or some property that one category has, the other one doesn't. So then you could actually prove that no, one of the two is significantly more structured than the other one, for example. But then you would, yeah. Yeah, this, I mean, again, I don't know. It really depends on how it really depends also how the category you get out of it, because the one of the question remains open also from the article is like, okay, what type of category structure I impose on qualia? And to me, this was since the beginning, since like when I find out this idea of using category theory was like the first thing. Okay, I like that you want to use mathematics, but usually you first know what you have, and then you use mathematics to talk about it. But if it feels like you don't have a clear idea what you're talking about, then choosing the way you use mathematics is basically determines also what you're talking about, more or less exactly what you say. You are imposing a structure. Again, it could still give you results. I mean, it doesn't, but you should be aware of what you're doing. So yeah, it could be an approximating thing. So, but no. So in that sense, you can definitely reveal differences between the two different structures. Maybe not the absence of a functor. You can prove the absence of an equivalence of categories, for example. But then it depends again. So between two fixed things, that you can do. That definitely you can do. If that is what your question, the answer is yes.
Yeah, it really helps like refine the question using, these levels of similarity. Being at a certain level might tell you something about how these two categories are not the same. And maybe it is meaningful when trying to address this question of, is there something about qualia or subjective consciousness that cannot be captured by these mathematical structures, maybe.
Yeah, this already means putting mathematical structure on qualia. So in that sense, yeah, it's really like a kind of circle. I mean, somehow.
Yeah, exactly.
In that sense, from my perspective, you just have a language, and maybe this helps you talking in a more structured way about something. We kind of feel it's there, but we don't know exactly how to talk about it. But then what to say is still up to you. Right? So, yeah, but then again, I'm an ignorant on this thing, so I'm trying to understand what many words means, because again, some words are English words, but they're used technically, and this I don't know what the technical meaning is. So yeah. I'm also intrigued actually by the last part when there is this sorry. Oh, I should actually ask how you pronounce your name for real. Yeung?
Just call me Nata. It's okay. Nata is
okay.
fine. Yeah.
Eventually, I'll try to understand.
No, it's fine. I let everyone go for Nata because it's just complicated. Yeah. Because
so as Nata was.
Sorry? Keep saying.
So as Nata was pointing out, I mean, of course, the paper it's actually focusing also on, okay, but then how do I prove these things? So how do I verify this stuff? And to me, it's actually interesting because that's the part I don't know. I have no idea how to do these testings. So in that sense, I would ask Emanuela, I mean, is this part, does it resonate with what you know, with what you do? Or
yeah, in some ways, yes, but other ways, no. I mean, yeah, related to the first question too, like when we measure like neurons and try to determine the structure, I really have no sense of how that's really done in practice. And in the paper, they make a point to say that it's, of course, not going to be single neurons necessarily, or even small groups of neurons. It could also be like field potentials. And I did have the question as well, like how, at what level, I guess you assume there's some continuity in the structure, and therefore, if you measure activity in large regions across the brain and connectivity, that would still give you a sense of the MICS compared to if you're measuring single neurons. I mean, that's not really possible in humans, of course, but it does resonate in some sense, but I'm very curious to see in practice how it's actually done. And they, of course, describe some experiments, but I wonder, like, is this something that I could do, for example, with the facilities that we have where we do measure, connectivity in different regions, like large regions of the brain in infants? I mean, that's something that we can do, but is that, can we apply, is the information that we get from that useful for determining an MCIS, for example?
Or testimony plays an evidence role. Yeah, determining might be, at least from mathematical perspective, too strong.
Sorry.
Fine. Yeah, I'm also more from mathematical perspective. So yeah.
Maybe I have a question, unless there's something. So, does any of you know actually IIT a bit more in detail, or?
Depends on to what detail you want to know.
No,
I'm not sure whether I can answer.
Because okay, so other than there was this five postulates that Emanuela also was slightly puzzled. I mean, okay, I can understand again from the mathematical attitude, I can see the approach. So this I can kind of skip a little bit. But there was this example that the paper gives about first like two dots with different states and how to describe it, but then it jumps to something. Oh, now let's get three gates, or and XOR, and they're linked. And they're like, okay, linked how? So of course the paper sends you to another paper that I didn't check, to be honest, yet.
That would be
But
helpful actually. That is, I think the IIT 3.0 paper. In that paper, they explain the structure, the mathematical formalism behind it, and the logical gate is really just give you the state, how they change, and the determinacy between the change of the states. Yeah, it's kind of like to reflect the causal relationship in physical substrate of consciousness, like mentioned the neurons, yeah, how they relate to each other. But in this paper, of course, it's not that clear. Yeah. Just
okay,
check
so it's
the
not just
IIT
me.
paper.
Okay, I should read the other paper.
Yeah. It's because basically this paper is presenting the category theory method. If they give you too much detail about IIT, then it would be overwhelming.
Okay.
Yeah, but just check the IIT papers, the 3.0 or the 4.0, but this paper is more related to 3.0 and maybe also 2.0, I think.
Is there a big difference between the two?
They're just the new versions. They always update the IIT theory, and recently, I think not so recently, last year, they have the IIT 4.0 already, and they do make a difference between the 3.0 and 4.0. For example, the identity is not that strong like they used to claim, yeah, in the 4.01, but still a similar identity relationship there called explanatory identity. Yeah.
Thank you. Then I'll check it out.
Yeah. So maybe we just call the day. Call for the day. It's already almost an hour. Thank you for
Good job.
coming.
Thank you so much. It was so
Thank
helpful.
you.
Really.
Thank you very much.
I'm happy. Then see you around. Ciao.
See you. Thank you. It was very informative. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.